My name is Ross Becker. The ground rules for this interview are that O.J. Simpson has agreed to answer any and all of my questions. Neither he nor his lawyers have seen or been told those questions in advance. I've agreed not to ask Mr. Simpson questions concerning his children, his personal finances, about any privileged conversations between Mr. Simpson and his attorneys, or any questions about any post-trial legal matters. The only people in the room during this interview are the camera operators, O.J., and myself. Also, a copy of this interview will be kept in the custody of my attorney as a guarantee that it will be disseminated exactly as it was recorded in real time. O.J., before we start to unravel this bizarre odyssey that you have gone through, why are you doing this interview? Why did you agree to this interview under these circumstances?
Well, I think obviously it's well known that I've been wanting to talk for quite a while. When the case was over, I wanted to talk immediately. Unfortunately, I had some new lawyers, and I was involved in another litigation, a civil suit. They had some concerns because they hadn't really spent any time with me. They had a lot of concerns that anything I might say may be used against me, and not knowing me and not understanding how I see things and how I speak, and really not, even though they followed the case, not being totally up on the case, they were a little reluctant for me to speak at that time. So was most of my lawyers. They felt that I was at a time where I was still coming down from an emotional, this emotional thing.
Are you doing this for the money too?
Oh, obviously. I've spent a career collecting a certain wealth. A lot of people have relied on me over those years, family, in-laws, and I've had to use all that up, all those savings up, to defend myself.
Were you coached? Were you coached at all on what to say here today?
Not at all. I think one thing that my new lawyers found, once they sat down with me, and they did sit down with me, they did interview me, and in the course of firing questions at me, they felt pretty good about me as a client.
About letting you go and talk and say it the way you want to say it.
Want to say things, yes.
I want to begin by talking about two very important moments, and both of them happened in the courtroom. One was the day you stood before Judge Lancito and you said that you were 100% not guilty. Now, ultimately, of course, the jury agreed with that, but the truth is that in the minds of millions of people around the world, you killed Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. They believe that. That's their perception. And because you had a lot of money and you had some innovative lawyers, you're going to get away with it. Can you live with that public perception in the minds of some people?
Well, I don't think doing this tape is going to change a lot of minds. Basically, I think the people who have had faith in me and believed in me, hopefully I'll justify that and give them some fodder so that when they're out debating with people, have a little more ammunition. But I also think that I believe in people. I've always got along with people. I've always found people interesting, and I think basically people are honest and they want to be fair. And I think as this trial goes on and as I speak more, some truths will come out that didn't come out during the course of this trial. I felt that during the trial there was a lot of misrepresentations made by the prosecution that for whatever reason the media used. Maybe it was a better story. I realize now that it's the story, the ratings are more important than the truth, and that's something that has become abundantly clear to me through this ordeal, and especially since this ordeal has been over, and as we speak, hopefully that will become abundantly clear to a lot of our viewers.
You were a very public man. Your whole career was out in the public, but the question is, you can never be that way again, can you?
Well, I don't want to be that way again, to be honest. I like me. I like my image. I felt a certain responsibility. I had heroes when I was a kid growing up, and I felt a certain responsibility, and I thought I did well with that responsibility. I wasn't perfect, like no hero, no American, no human is perfect, and I had my faults, but despite what I see some of my distractors say, I don't think I went out of my way to work on my image. I think everyone who knew me knew the OJ they saw on TV. The OJ that they work with is the OJ that the guy that they run around with and hang out with. Most of the people that I've ever worked with in my life have become friends, and they will say I'm the same guy.
The other moment in the trial that we all remember, of course, is the reading of the verdict. Not guilty. What, that moment, when you heard those words, what went through your mind?
I was really numb. I must admit, up until the day before, I thought it would be a hung jury. I thought one or two of the jurors would not vote for acquittal. And I was real concerned about that because Johnny Cochran had told me it'd be maybe 2 years before he could come back to the case. I knew what Sheck and Neufeld, these guys had other lives. So,
you looked happy and you looked relieved.
Well, I was relieved, but I was almost numb. I was fighting my emotions. The one thing I didn't want to do was lose, I don't say lose my cool, but I can say this. I looked at Van Adder, and if Van Adder would have looked at me, I would have lost my cool.
Philip Van Adder.
Yeah, Phil Van Adder. I would have lost my cool, and I was just trying to tell myself that I had gotten through this. I tried to do it with some kind of dignity, and I didn't want to lose it at that moment.
Did you think about Nicole?
At that moment, no. No, at that moment, I was thinking about I was going to hug Sydney and Justin. I was going to hug Arnell and Jason. I had gone, what, 16 months when I hadn't been able to touch anybody that I loved. I can touch lawyers, but nobody that I can love, and it was real tough. And I'm a toucher, I'm a hugger. Everyone who knows me knows I'm a very affectionate person. And my kids, my son and I, he's 25, we kiss. You know, my young son and I, we kiss. Sydney, Arnell, we're kissers and huggers. And I think more than anything, I was saying I was going to see my kids. I knew my older kids were strong. It was my younger kids I was most concerned about. And on my mind that day was I actually had planned to walk out of that courtroom, take a van or a car right down to Laguna and hug my kids.
A tough question, but you knew, obviously, Nicole very well. She was your wife for a long time. What do you think she would have said about the verdict that day?
Oh, Nicole would have stood by me. Nicole, there's so many people who are alleged friends. The interesting thing about it, Nicole knew a lot of the weaknesses of the people who are, I think, benefiting from what has happened here. And Nicole would have been, you know, like she always was with me when there was a problem, in our family, that the two of us, no matter what we were going through in our lives, we always stood real strong with one another. When we were apart, something that the press don't seem to want to talk about or write about, they want to give a total opposite skew on it. Even when we were apart, when we were divorced, when we had other lives, whenever there was something major, something emotional, Nicole on a few occasions had some very serious, for her, emotional issues come up with her then boyfriends. She didn't call her mother, she called OJ. And maybe Cora Fishman, her best friend. Faye wasn't in her life at that point in time, but I was a person she came to with problems that you would be really surprised that this so-called jealous, possessive individual, that this woman would come to me with problems that she had with her lovers.
We could talk for days and go back all over the events of the trial, the specific evidence, but let me ask you about some key questions, because people became a soap opera for people, and they followed every day of this trial. And there were nagging questions in people's minds when the verdict was announced not guilty, because things they couldn't understand, and things that they may not have had a clear picture in their mind as to why this happened. The amazing number of improbable coincidences concerning this crime that tie to you. Do you agree that there's an amazing number of improbable coincidences?
Not at all.
Not at all? Your
Not
blood,
at all.
your blood
Well,
at the crime scene?
I don't believe that was a coincidence.
How do you explain it?
Well, first of all, if it was my blood, which I don't believe, but if in fact it was my blood, it wasn't deposited there that night. I was not there that night. I had spent a lot of time at Nicole's house, probably more at her house than my house in the previous year. I had been there quite a bit. That's where we kept our dogs. I had been there the week previous to these murders because the dogs were fighting, and I had to go over and get one of the dogs and bring him home. But when I look at the evidence of blood, this so-called blood trail, I ask a lot of questions. First of all, I want to know why would someone like Mazzola, who collected these blood drops, who claimed in previous testimony under oath that she put her initials on each one of these bindles, but when they got the cell mark and they got the DOJ, there was no initials there. Of course, the prosecution, as they did with every witness in this case who dealt with the blood, who was on the scene that day, got her to question her own testimony. In her case, it was maybe she didn't initial those bindles. When she initialed the bindles on everything else in this case, and every other case she's done it. She testified she did in this case, and for some reason, those initials disappeared. That, Ross, and I may go on sometimes because I got so much in me that I want to say, and I may get a little long at times. That in court one day came out. The prosecution, I guess, in cross-examinations were somewhat prepared for it, and they got her to say that maybe, after she claimed she had under oath, maybe she didn't. That night, I remember Bob Shapiro saying to me, well, that'll be the big story tonight. You know, I'm watching the news that night. When I got back to my cell, there wasn't one word mentioned about it. I think the big news was some inconsequential ruling Ito had, and to me, it's things like that. That was, to me, the best example. This should have been a pivotal point.
You've talked to the jury. Was it a pivotal point?
A few of I haven't talked to the jury, but a few of them have mentioned that they found that to be strange. So they were paying attention, but that night none of the pundits spoke about that. Right. And once again, you talk about the public out there, the public got the spin that they got at night, at that, you know, once they got home at night.
But the coincidences still remain. Okay. Again, you know, whether it's yours or not, the contention, your blood at the crime scene, your blood, coincidence, here at Rockingham, found the same night of that the crime happened, and in the Bronco.
Well, if in fact that was my blood here at the home, if in fact it was, I don't find that to be such a coincidence.
Was it?
I don't think so, but I don't find that to be a coincidence. How did it get here?
Whose blood was it here at Rockingham?
If in fact it was mine, I live here at Rockingham. You know, I think you're going to be surprised at how little blood is involved in this bloody home that I hear. It's
there were drops of blood.
Drops of blood on the driveway. If in fact it happened, if in fact I deposited it, it would have not been, certainly not after leaving Nicole's house, because I hadn't been in Nicole's house, and maybe when I was running around. I really had absolutely no answer for that. I personally, I am very skeptical about whose blood that was.
What about the victim's blood in your Bronco?
Once again, we go back to the same thing. I hear about blood being in my Bronco. I'm told that there should have been a lot more blood in the Bronco if this was a victim's blood. It amazes me that experienced criminalists could look in this car, in this Bronco, looking for blood. This is the trial of the century, the case of all time. I mean, you heard the detectives talk about that from day one, and for 2 months they can't find blood. People got in that car looking for blood on this dashboard and on the divider, I guess. I can't recall what they call that. Console. And they don't find blood. And months later they find it, they put it all together, and they say it's the victim's blood. I find it curious that there was a 4 allele drop of blood on the steering wheel that didn't come to Nicole, didn't come to Ron Goldman, didn't come to O.J. Simpson. I would submit that if they would have typed that blood drop or smudge that they saw on the door handle of the Bronco, it probably would have been a 4 allele, but they didn't. I don't understand how. I definitely went to my Bronco right before I left. I opened the door of my Bronco. I went in the Bronco. Allen Park, Cato were here at that time. Why wasn't my fingerprints on the handle of my Bronco? I submit somebody opened that Bronco, didn't want their fingerprints on it, erased it. I submit that there's no way that Mark Furman could have seen the blood spots that he claimed to have seen on the running board and stuff of that car unless the door was open. And I think that was proven. I don't think anybody disputes that you could not see those blood spots that he claimed to have seen unless he was in the Bronco.